Hey scholars, welcome to chapter 19-2, and we're looking at what are some possible effects of a warmer atmosphere. So what would this look like in the future if this does continue the warming process? So we look at this as called enhanced global warming, which is meaning even further than it already has been. Could have severe consequences overall. Again, if we reach that tipping point that we were talking about earlier, it can have irreversible climate change, which means we can never come back to where the climate as we know it as of now. And I hate playing the game, but worst case scenarios, these are some of the things that could happen with enhanced global warming. One of those is ecosystems collapsing. Low-lying cities like New Orleans and Florida, Miami, and Coral, all those places down there would flood out. Wildfires in forests, prolonged droughts, grasslands becoming more dust bowls or desert areas, more destructive storms, and perhaps we've seen that in the recent years. Glaciers shrinking and rivers drying up. Those are some of the things that we would kind of see as far as worst case scenarios. We're going to come back to this image during class period. We're going to reinforce this with a little creative writing assignment. And you're going to use the list. This is just the things that, what would the Earth look like if we increased by 2 degrees Celsius, if we increased by 3 degrees Celsius, or 4 degrees Celsius overall. And it just gives you some description of what could happen overall in those temperature ranges. So we're going to use this in class. I'm not going to talk more about this right now, but some of these things you might want to take a look at and you're going to get more practice with when we do the class assignment on this. Severe droughts is increasing the browning of the earth. So we have seen droughts occurring, and acceleration of global warming has led to more droughts. Biodiversity will then decrease with less moist conditions. Net primary productivity will decrease. We'll have drier climate. Ecosystems will increase, like deserts would increase overall, and other effects of prolonged lack of water would happen as well. So not a good thing, but severe droughts have been increasing, have known to increase. Like if you've ever seen that movie, Book of Eli, I think most of the area that you see is very desert, dry, dust bowl-like, and that kind of is a futuristic film about kind of the what's happened after global warming and things like that. Ice and snow are melting. Why will global warming be worse in the polar regions? We're not really sure why. It's just maybe that's the way the air currents circulate. They're all motioning, if you remember, towards the poles and going away from that, but not really quite sure why, but maybe because of how very intricate the freezing point is, and if you go a little bit higher, then you're no longer freezing, so that could have the biggest impact. It's a very unstable system if you're only looking at balancing between a degree or two. The importance of climate role of floating sea ice is that, this is interesting, a lot of people think that, well, as the ice caps melt, all the global temperature or sea level will rise. And it says, some good news in your book says that because sea ice floats, it does not really contribute to a rising sea level when it melts. The Arctic's contribution to a rising sea level will come from land-based ice that melts and runs into the sea faster than the new ice can form. So not necessarily from the actual ice chunks that are floating around now, but later on when that melts from the land. That's when it'll increase. Mountain glaciers are the ones we have to worry about. Affected by average snowfall and average warmer temperatures are going to cause those to melt and not replenish themselves with ice, but when freezing because of the overall temp warming of the earth. We have seen this happen already. The European Alps glaciers are disappearing, South America glaciers are disappearing, and Greenland, which is one of our largest landmasses full of ice, is seeing warmer temperatures as well, which could be scary for the future. Let's talk about Greenland a little bit. It is our largest island. It is composed of 80% of ice material. 10% of the world's fresh water is held within those glaciers on Greenland. So Greenland's not green, it's ice, and Iceland's not ice, it's green. In 1996 to 2007, we've seen a net loss of ice doubled in the last 10 years or so, 20 years. And the effect of sea level, if melting continues, could be more increasing the sea level because it holds so much fresh water and it's on land. It is a land-based glacier. This just looks at a couple of different images. In the white is the ice, and you can see in 82 it was very abundant in Greenland, and then now not so much in 2007, that was a few years ago. So it definitely dropped off quite a bit there. And there's just another image of Greenland, how large Greenland is as far as landmass goes and size of ice sheet over Greenland. All right, so sea levels, if that happens, are rising then, as that's also going to expand warmer waters, which can cause some some problems with coral reefs and different ocean animals and organisms. And also is going to hold, if the warmer waters continue, then we're not going to hold as much carbon as well. Melting of land-based ice is, again, our biggest concern. And again, Greenland we just talked about. If Greenland melts, we could be in some big trouble. And if that does happen, we would see a degradation and loss of 1/3 of the coastal estuaries, wetlands, and coral reefs, a disruption of fisheries, that's going to throw off where those fish are migrating and swimming, flooding of low-lying barrier islands, possibly like the Outer Banks, and coastal areas like New Orleans and even the Everglades down in Key West. The disruption of coastal flooding, contamination of freshwater aquifers by salt water. Again, there's too much salinity in it in the water. Maybe not as salty as it was, but a little bit more. It's still more than we can drink. Submergence of low-lying islands in the Pacific and Indian Oceans as well. And this is just what would happen if the flood went up by 1 meter. We looked at this with New Orleans, but this just shows Florida as well and how much Florida would shrink because of a 1 meter rise in sea level as well. And this is, you can see how, close to sea level these low-lying islands. This is the Maldives in the Indian Ocean. This whole thing would be wiped out with more than a meter increase in sea level. Permafrost is another problem, and permafrost is held in the Arctic. It is basically permanent ice or water that's in the ground that's frozen, and carbon is present in there as methane, because when it does melt, there are things that die and that they get trapped in that ice below the soil surface, as well as lake bottoms. So in 2004, the Arctic Climate Impact Assessment was done and found that 10–20% of the permafrost might melt this century. That's bad because it holds CH4, which is another greenhouse gas, and then putting that in the atmosphere, which can be another, and just increase global warming as well. So there's a look at the Arctic tundra from current to this could be the future. This is a scary thought as far as more methane entering the atmosphere. So ocean currents are changing, but the threat is really unknown. We don't know. We know that they're changing. We don't know how much that's going to impact us overall. We've seen increased rain in the North Atlantic, melting glaciers, but not thought to be an immediate problem with ocean currents, but could be in the future. We don't really quite know. Scientists can't really quite come to a consensus on how that's exactly going to impact us long term or even now. We know that extreme weather will increase in some areas. We're going to see heat waves in some places of the world and droughts in some areas, but then other areas that they're not used to having, prolonged rains and flooding. Will the storms get worse? A lot of people think yes, but there's a lot more studies that need to be done. Some people say they have been getting worse. Like they have gotten worse overall, like Katrina and Rita, and some of the ones that we're having now as well. Global warming is a major threat to biodiversity. Again, the most susceptible ecosystems are coral reefs, polar seas, coastal wetlands. All of those, high elevation mountaintops where the snow is going to melt, the Arctic tundra. Those are habitats that have biodiversity, lots of it, especially coral reefs and wetlands. But again, those are going to be the ones most impacted by global warming as well. What about major threat to biodiversity? Also, migratory animals. They use temperature in some of their guiding and things. So how's that going to change migratory patterns? What about forests? Usually see with global warming, we have insects, fungi, and microbes that could see increased populations because of the warming, which those, again, have a big negative effect a lot of times on forest ecosystems, especially non-native or invasive insects and fungi and bacteria. So those are a couple of problems that could happen in the future. This is just look at changes in the average ocean temperatures overall and looking at the bleaching threshold, the temperature at which coral is bleached and destroyed. And you can see that's about 85 degrees Fahrenheit. And you can see that in the recent years we have seen a lot more temperature increase and past that bleaching threshold all the way. Well, we predict it's going to occur. We're right here, right now, but it will predict to increase even further. But that's kind of a bold prediction. Exploding populations of the mountain pine beetles in British Columbia. Again, some people attribute this. Some scientists attribute this to global warming. They do better warm temperatures, able to migrate more north in order to become more invasive and kill more forests. That could be another problem as well. Climate change will shift areas where crops can be grown as well. As we had decrease in tropical and subtropical areas, those may shift, and it might increase in northern latitudes. But that's the problem because a lot of those soils right now, anyway, are not as productive. The soil is not as fertile as it is in the south. So therefore, we could have a problem with at least farming overall and producing food. Might have to start genetically engineering crops to become more drought tolerant and to thrive in less fertile or productive soils. We will see. It will have an impact on the health of people as well. We'll see death from heat waves. We'll see deaths from cold weather will decrease, obviously, because we'll see more heat waves. But the higher temperatures also can cause increased flooding, which can cause storm damage and house damage and people damage. Increase some forms of air pollution. More ozone, which would be a bad thing. We don't need more ozone. That actually, too much ozone in the lower part of the atmosphere is a bad thing. That's toxic to us. And then more insects, microbes, and molds and fungi that can cause some negative impacts on our human health as well. And that's the horrible negative outlook that could happen from global warming. We'll see you guys next time with 19.3.